I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council Virtual Study Session meeting for Tuesday, December 8th, 2020. It is 6:30 or 18:30. And just as a reminder, there is an executive session at the end, toward the end of this portion of the meeting tonight. All right, all council is present. In council tonight, we have three items that we're going to be discussing. The first item is going to be ID number 20-294, McDonald Automotive PD amendment to the PD. Let's see. And I do just want to remind council that what we have before us tonight will be it's the preliminary project plan to provide feedback. It's also called the P4. And what this is, there's no action on council's part tonight, and that the intent of the preliminary project meeting, or the P4, is to provide feedback and observations on a conceptual development so that the applicant may decide whether to move forward with a formal application or not, or change their application that they're considering right now. Any comments given at this meeting tonight are just gratuitous on our part. They're non-binding. Comments are made to are not intended to as consent or to imply consent in any aspect of the plan, not in strict conformance with all applicable regulations. Let's see, staff will make a summary presentation, and then the applicant will have the opportunity to also do a presentation. Following the presentation, council will have a time that we may ask questions or provide our observations to the applicant and indicate whether the project is supportable or under what conditions it may be supported. And in a sense, as I've told other council members, it's either a thumbs up, thumbs down, or maybe just a sideways thumb, just so that the applicant has an idea of what to expect from us. Let's see. And with that, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. I think the mayor covered what I would typically do in an introduction, so I think I'm just going to turn it directly over to staff. So I'm going to introduce Michael Sutherland. He's our Deputy Public Works, excuse me, Community Development, and he's going to make a staff presentation and then followed by the applicant. So, Michael.
Thanks, Mr. Ralph. Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council.
Michael, can you give us your title that you're going by tonight?
Certainly. I am Mike Sutherland. I am the Deputy Director of Community Development.
There's an inside joke there, folks.
I'd like to share my screen. And let's see, are you able to view the screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
There, we got it.
Great, thank you. So as the mayor mentioned, tonight is the McDonald Automotive, I'll just call it a concept. It could be called a P4 as well, for an auto conditioning center at 1151 West Mineral Avenue. As the mayor noted, the purpose of tonight's meeting is just to provide comments in a conceptual stage. There is no action. The applicant is hoping to find out whether the concept they have is supportable or not, and would like feedback in that regard. So I've got the vicinity map shown. This is 1151 West Mineral Avenue, just north of Mineral. And there's not a lot of major streets right around it, but just to the south of the subject property is the RSI building. And just to the west is another office building called where I believe it houses the Rocky Mountain Reserve and ISIS Technologies. And then Encompass Health is located to the east of the property. and is probably one of the more significant landmarks. Just to the north of the property is the Southbridge neighborhood of single-family detached homes. The site is zoned planned development. It allows office uses. It is a 6.67 acre site. The applicant's concept is for a two-story building, 31,300 square feet, approximately 75% vehicle prep, which is if they take in a used vehicle on trade, they will bring it to this facility and recondition it and then send it back to their used car facilities. Another 25% of the building would be office use. There are 126 parking spaces provided and 557 vehicle storage spaces for both used and new cars. The applicant has made some adjustments to this, and in their presentation, they'll show you what those adjustments are. Basically, the zoning allows for 20% unobstructed open space, which this concept is meeting. The maximum height is 30 feet within 150 feet of a residential zone. There's a required 50-foot buffer space between the residential development and the commercial development, which they are providing. And let's see, I'll just move right through. The comprehensive plan for this property indicates it's a suburban commercial property, which may exclude some auto-oriented uses. And the scale and intensity of non-residential uses should be limited to ensure compatibility with adjacent residential. So those are some of the key factors in the comprehensive plan. We've done a very preliminary economic analysis of this concept, and basically it's very similar, economically it's very similar to an office use, which provides some benefit, not much in the way of sales taxes, but more property value and the multiplier of having employees and service there. So the next steps are to listen to the applicant's presentation, save questions till the end of that, identify issues or concerns, and give an indication of support or conditions where the concept could possibly be supported. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you. Do you hear from the applicant now?
Wonderful, Michael. Thank you very much for the introduction. Just want to thank staff as well as City Council for taking the time to review our proposed development. I'm going to go and share my screen now and give a brief presentation. I know you're very busy, so hopefully this presentation will be somewhat short, but at the same time it is very dynamic and not linear by intention. So if you do have questions or comments, please feel free to let us know and we can bounce around as needed. There we go. So I just want to give you a brief overview of our timeline. So back in late April, we sent out notification to about 148 addresses within that 700-foot radius of the subject property. On that notification, we included a link to a website that included our site plan, some renderings, a flyover video, as well as a narrative. But probably more importantly, it also included a feedback and comment form. We felt due to the pandemic and not be able to have a physical meeting, this was the best option for us to get feedback from all those neighbors that were to be able to access it. So we left that open for about a month and a half, in which time we received about 56 independent views of the video. We had more than double that on the website, and all resulting in 17 comments. Most of those were from that web form, but we also had some from phone calls, as well as emails to ourselves, as well as the city staff. We responded to that in about late June via direct email, as well as an update to that website. And most of our response was really providing clarity as far as what a reconditioning center is, but also to address some of the concerns that neighbors had. Now, in late September, to try to help follow up with some of that, we held an additional Zoom call with the neighbors directly to the north of our property to get some additional feedback from them on that landscape buffer in particular, what they would like to see, what kind of amenities, landscaping, some of those items. So we took that feedback from that meeting and then went ahead and submitted for a SDP to the city, at which time we were encouraged to follow through the P4 process. A few weeks ago, we presented the Planning Commission. We heard a lot of comments back from them regarding the comp plan, some of the uses and the design. We actually incorporated a lot of those comments, most all of them, into this latest iteration that we'll be showing you tonight. So tonight, of course, we're here with City Council. So as you can imagine from our neighborhood response, and you had a copy of this in your packet, we heard from a lot of them with comments that we needed to clarify, the intent and scope of this project. In reality, it was kind of categorized into four main areas. So the first one is, what is the use of this building? What is reconditioning? Michael Sutherland had a pretty good example there as far as when you sell your car, new cars come in, they need to get, spiffed up, or more or less an elaborate detail facility to make these cars look nice and ready for sale. Same time, there might be some minor fixes done to maybe a broken windshield. You might change some fluids, but that's really about the extent of the reconditioning area. In addition to that, they'll have offices with training center and locker rooms and staff areas. The next main item that we found in these comments from the neighborhood was regarding noise and light. So I think, again, to address this, it's not a body shop, so it does not have the functions like a body shop would have with odors and noises. All the operations are maintained inside the premises of the building itself. And then when technicians do need to go out to retrieve a car to bring it in for reconditioning, we're actually going to be utilizing a computer-based matrix system where it actually locates the vehicle on site, so they don't need to go around clicking their remote and beeping the lights or the horn. So we'll be able to alleviate a lot of those noises and sounds from the parked cars. As far as light fixtures go, all exterior fixtures will be downcast, fully shielded at the property edges. At the edge of our landscape buffer, we will have a 0-foot candle. And in addition, a thing to note is that in contrast to an office building, at 5 o'clock, this facility is closed. So all the lights inside will be turned off, and they won't be spreading out beyond the envelope of the building itself. The parking lot, again, would be low security lighting, similar to what you would have in any kind of office environment. Landscape was one of those concerns as well, and that was one of the reasons why we had that special Zoom call and conference call with those direct neighbors to the north to get some of their feedbacks and really determine what some of the amenities that they wanted to have and included into this development. Traffic was another concern that we heard a few times in those comments. And although there's a lot of cars and a lot of parking spaces on this lot, that's just the nature of the McDonald Auto Group business. There's actually very little traffic compared to an office building itself. And most of that traffic is from employees coming and going, a few trips of vehicles, about 30 per day. And most of those are during non-peak rush hour times. So it does not add to the load already present on Mineral Avenue for office or school zones. So why are we here? As Michael Sutherland had mentioned, we're looking to amend the general PD to include our specific use, because the existing general PD only listed as office park for allowed uses. There's already been a precedent in the past of, I think, 5 other developments in this general PD requesting and amending it for their specific use, and some of those, which similar to our development, does have a mix of office use and another accessory use. I won't get into all the different criteria, but I do feel that our proposed design meets these 5 PD amendment criteria, as it is one of the allowed uses in a B1 or B2 office zoning, which would typically apply towards an office park. So looking at the comprehensive plan, staff have provided you in your packet a table detailing all the goals and objectives within the comp plan and how our proposed development meets that. So rather than rehashing all those elements, really wanted to focus just on some key topics here. So this administration and reconditioning facility in its pure and simple nature is a commercial service use, which is identified in the comp plan. It is there to support the other McDonald auto facilities in Littleton. And then please know that this facility is not open to the public, nor is there a retail destination associated with this building. Overall, this building really lessens the burden and the load of the existing automotive group, McDonald Automotive Group's facilities, allowing them to better serve the community and Littleton residents with their services. So our proposed development is a lower overall intensity compared to an allowable office build out. So our height setback and the building scale are more sensitive to the adjacent residential neighbors than what is allowed by an office build out. We have provided enhanced landscaping buffer, really met with the neighbors to the north to find out what amenities they wanted to have in that buffer. Compared to what could be allowed on this site, we have a very low trips per day count. Our parking would probably be pretty similar to what someone would do on another development on this site. The lighting, as we had mentioned earlier, somewhat decreased with our operations ending at 5 o'clock at night. Therefore, the internal lights wouldn't be spilling out onto the adjacent neighbors. And overall, our load on public utilities, roadways, infrastructure is lower than that of what how many occupants would be in the office building. In general, it is a less intensive use. So our previous design we had submitted and had some discussion with Planning Commission. We listened to their feedbacks as well as the feedbacks that we had from our neighborhood meetings in the past and made another iteration to our design to try to address some of the comments we had during this P4 process. So looking at our new site here, it is a 2-story administration and reconditioning facility on about 6.7 acre site. It has a 32,000 square foot footprint with a 5,800 square foot upper story. Again, that upper story is set back from the north property line quite a ways, more than the 150 feet required. The max height, regardless of this building, is 30 feet, well within the allowable code requirements. And all rooftop equipment is shielded within that lower building parapet, where we only have a 1-story surrounding that upper portion. Some of the things that we changed on this site plan compared to what we had presented to Planning Commission, we did hear that the parking stalls, there was too many on site. So we rearranged our parking. We included some permeable paving on site. We got our parking stall count down to about 500 stalls. In doing so, this actually allowed us to get a little bit more landscaping throughout those internal areas. So we were able to bump up from that 20% landscaping to about 28% landscaping. A few things I wanted to kind of note here. We did incorporate some living wall elements across these northern property lines, across the northern, parking stalls adjacent to the northern residential properties. And those living walls at about 10 feet height will fully shield basically the line of sight from the patio area of most of the residences to the north, looking out over the parking lot. In addition, you can see our increased landscaping buffer on the north with a walking trail, some seating elements. Fence here is on the south, off of this private drive. That's a shared access recorded easement into our facility, as well as off of the circle into this already established curb cut. We'll go through these renderings real quick, just give you a little bit more update as far as what some of those landscape elements might look like, how we're trying to achieve some of the screening with some berms, different landscaping techniques. Freaking out a little bit here, I apologize. All right, let's try this again here. There we go. This is from a perspective from the southeast of the property corner. You can see here down in the lower right-hand corner some of our use of some of the permeable paving. Again, that will help not only with water quality, helps with some of the heat island, as well as just general aesthetics of the site too, to give it a little bit softer edge of the overall presence. For the building itself, we try to incorporate some very high-end materials with architectural concrete block, storefront, glazing systems, banded windows, architectural canopies, a lot of these things that the upper story is clad in a metal panel, again providing some contrast, but it is a lower profile to what you would expect for that second story component in this office or this proposed development. For example, that screen wall, this is on that northern edge of our site. And this really is to provide screening from the adjacent neighbors, not only for visual, but also for some sound elements, and to help soften that harsh edge. You see, we continue this living wall down to the south on the building edge, or sorry, to the east of the building edge, to again help break up that large mass of the structure and really soften that edge a bit. From the walking trail for the residents, this is a pretty good example of what our intent is to try to screen all the parking areas through landscape, through berms, and other techniques. We've incorporated a couple sitting areas with a little bench and a little roundabout for them to be able to enjoy. Again, with these berms, trying to shield those views of the adjacent parking lot as much as possible. You see here example of some of those berms and retaining walls, and this is an example of where that fence would be for the adjacent neighbors.
And David, that was looking north?
Correct. That is looking north from that northern edge of the parking lot, basically.
Thank you.
This is a northeast perspective of the building here, just on the other side of where we were looking before, on the other side of one of those living wall elements, helping to screen that parking field. And again here, this is the south elevation, the main primary facade for this building, showing where that building does get stepped back on the second story on the north as well as on the west side here. So that was very quick, but I hope we addressed some of your questions, or at least identified some of our reasoning. And we'd love to hear some of your thoughts and be able to address some of your questions you might have. We have a plethora of other support documentation if some of your questions stray from maybe what was specifically presented.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, David. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, I just want to make a little bit of an observation here just right up front. I know that the City Council as well as the staff have received a lot of emails from residents asking very detailed questions. And as the council is aware, the P4 process is really not intended to get into that level of detail. So that would be more appropriate if a very specific application was to move forward. And so I just want to recognize that publicly. We have shared all the emails that the staff has received with the applicant, so they're at least aware of the questions being asked. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And council, we're going to open up to some questions or comments. We'll start with Council Member Driscoll.
Yes, thank you, David. David, was this the presentation that was delivered to the homeowners?
Yes, this does have the site plan that was delivered to the homeowners. Today, we did feel it was important to update those adjacent neighbors on some of our proposed design changes.
Can
David,
you also?
if you could not share your screen at this point unless you have more you want to show us.
I am trying to hit the stop share, and I don't know if Tyler can override me, but it is not. There we go.
There we go.
I'm
sorry, Patrick. Go ahead.
And I don't know, maybe this is a better question for staff, but how long is this property? It doesn't look like it's ever been developed. Is this property for sale, or is it being leased, or does McDonald already own this property?
The McDonald Auto Group intends to purchase the property.
Okay. And what's the timing on this? Assuming it moves forward, what's the timing? Is this to start next in 2020 or excuse me, 2021?
Our goal would be to start in 2021.
Okay. That's all for right now. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And Mark, you still have your hand up. Did you have something?
No, Mark does not.
Okay, cool. All right, Council Member Elrod.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, David, and welcome everyone. Thank you for doing the P4. So this area, we've looked at before in the past where residential was trying to come into this area. And one of the reasons we chose not to support, and I don't remember if I was on Planning Commission maybe at that time, to not support residential was because of the importance of sales tax revenue dollars. Now, in this particular case, I think I understand that it's not sales tax revenue driven, but it's employment opportunity. So from that perspective, do you have an idea of how many employees would be working in this location and what the average wages are of those employees?
Explain to us how many employees you currently have, or Patrick, at your current reconditioning facility, and how many you would intend to add once this is completed.
I'll answer that question. This is Michael McDonald. We currently have 40 employees that would start at the reconditioning center when we opened, and hopefully with volume increases, our staff would grow to approximately 50. So 50 employees is kind of what it's designed for. I will get back to the exact number on compensation for the employees, but I would say the average compensation is $45,000 to $55,000.
In addition, I just want to add that although this doesn't have direct sales tax revenue associated with this property, it is a support facility for all of the McDonald Auto Group facilities. So in some regard, it does help facilitate those other locations with their sales tax as a result of just being able to support the needs and functions of the group.
Follow-up question to that then. There is a use tax component potentially here. Is there not? And maybe Michael or Jennifer or somebody else in staff can speak to that, given equipment that you'll be purchasing, and would all of that stay within Littleton? I just want to make sure the purchasing headquarters is within Littleton so that the use tax revenue would stay within Littleton in that case.
Typically, any parts that are sold to recondition that facility would probably be sold in Littleton. But as you know, with new automobiles, that's when you buy a brand new automobile or a used automobile, you're taxed in the location where you live rather than where you buy it.
All right, thank you very much. We'll go me, and then it'll be Council Member Milliman. City Manager, I see your hand is up. Did you want to say something now?
Yeah, I think I'd probably add a little bit more detail to kind of the revenue the city might expect. I know Tiffany Hooten, our finance director, is here, so she can correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly we have the building use tax that the city would collect at the construction of the site itself. And then as equipment kind of moves in that's perhaps replaced, then there'd be a tax on that as well over time.
Great, thank you. Council Member Milliman, why don't you go ahead, then I'll follow you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being so thorough. I have two questions. Actually, this probably goes to Mike or Jennifer. What are the current zoning allowances at that property right now? What is allowable on that site right now? What are some examples?
So right now, the only use allowed on that property is office. So for example, the building just to the south, the RSI office building, is a typical use in that area. There have, as the applicant noted, there have been some amendments to allow different types of uses in that area. One was a residential use to the east of this. Also, there was a hospital use, but typically the only use that's allowed there right now is office. And we take that pretty literally.
Okay, thank you. And I will have to say the design of the building I thought looked very, very nice. Actually, it was very aesthetically pleasing. So I appreciate that. I have a question about the vegetation buffer. I looked on Google Map just now or earlier and noticed that the office buildings that would just be to the west of this property have basically no buffer between their office buildings and the fence to the and then to the fence that borders the neighborhood. So I appreciate all of the landscaping ideas that you have in place for this property. As said on one of the slides, it said that you would be working with property owners regarding amenities and vegetation that they'd like to see along the property line. Did you work with them on that, or is that something you're also going to do in addition to whatever you have planned that you presented to us tonight?
We had a second meeting with our neighbors to the north. We talked about what kind of amenities that they may enjoy or look for. We've catered the design to that most recent meeting with them. That will continue to evolve. They would like to have some input on what type of trees and where they're placed. And we told them as long as it was allowable by the city of Littleton, we would do everything we could to accommodate their requests. They also talked about the path in between the border of the east and west property boundary. And they also requested maybe some soft seating areas out there that they could enjoy and take advantage of this as somewhat of an extension of their backyard and a buffer between this new development. So we have had the input from them and we will continue as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you very much. I'm up next, and then it'll be the Mayor Pro Tem and then Council Member Grove. And my first question is going to just be for Michael McDonald. How long have you been in Littleton now, the business?
The business has been in Littleton since 1965. That was originally with Volkswagen. So it's been a long time in Littleton. And all the cars that are reconditioned in Littleton would be sold in Littleton. So we do have stores in Lakewood, but that has a separate reconditioning center. So we've been blessed to be in Littleton.
Great. Well, thank you for being in Littleton. I really do appreciate it. I've purchased vehicles from you in the past, and it's always been a well-run operation. So thank you very much there. A couple regarding the design, the berm and screening to the north. I find that is a paramount for the neighbors to the north. While it needs to be high, but we don't want it to be. I wouldn't want to see it so high that it creates a shade to their yards, that kind of thing. So that berm to me would be very important. How high do you see that berm being at this point?
It'd probably be in areas of 3 to 4 feet in relation to that walking path.
Plus the vegetation of some sort.
Yeah, exactly. The vegetation, I think we have some canopy trees with upwards of 12 to 15 feet tall. And again, that will be somewhat dictated by the exact species that we end up landing on and coordinate with the neighbors. I think more importantly is also that living wall screen, be able to use that to shield and screen the majority of that parking lot.
Our goal is to be conscientious of the neighbors immediately, and it is harder and harder these days to find large trees. The berm is there to provide immediate verticality and screening with new plantings.
Great. Another one with the light pollution. I think that would be a huge one for me as well. For the neighbors to the north, I'd hate to have them to deal with the night sky being gone for them. So the light pollution is a big issue. So if you could consider that in your design, if you will. The one part I'm not that thrilled about on the design, and it's the building itself, as far as the fenestration and also the slope of the roof. to me, it just has kind of a boxy look. So if you could just keep that in mind. That's just comments. So I appreciate your guys coming forward with this plan. We'll move on to Mayor Pro Tem and then Grove.
Thank you, Mayor. I really want to echo other council members' comments and saying thank you to McDonald Automotive for being such a good and longstanding corporate citizen of the city. That means a lot, I think, to all of us. I really appreciate you all going through the P4 process. And I really appreciate the hard work that's obviously gone into your proposal. I appreciate McDonald Automotive's sort of very obvious business need for this kind of facility. For me, this is just not the site for it. And I just want to make my sort of once and for all comment, and I probably won't say anything else tonight. So, I obviously read the council packet. I spoke with a couple of staff members about the economic implications of this proposal. I talked with, or communicated rather, with a couple of the potentially affected neighbors. And then I watched the Planning Commission meeting top to bottom. And I think, Planning Commission spent 2.5 hours on this, and they, I think, vetted it pretty darn thoroughly. I'm not interested in this going forward for kind of 3 main reasons. In other words, I'm not interested in it coming forward for a formal application for 3 main reasons. The first is that, our comprehensive plan identifies the use of this lot as suburban commercial. And I think that what's effectively a 600-car parking lot directly abutting a well-established residential neighborhood is simply not a compatible use. And I think it was Commissioner Miller made a good point that it doesn't set us off on a good foot, because this is the first P4 that's happened under the new comprehensive plan. We don't want to start off by sort of setting aside what's contemplated by the comprehensive plan. I simply don't think that 600-car parking lot right next to a residential neighborhood is a compatible use. The second issue for me is that, Littleton is largely a built-out community, and I think we need to be super strategic about any development or redevelopment that happens in the city. It needs to meet some of our civic needs. You all have heard me say this over and over again. Whether it's housing or with commercial development, I think we have a real and obvious need for sales tax. And my impression from staff is that this is simply not going to be a tax generating or revenue generating operation, with some of the kind of minor exceptions that have been talked about, property and use taxes. And then, the third reason for me is a timing issue. Council is going through our ULUC. We're on the cusp of talking about the corridor block, and that's obviously going to include mineral where this proposal would go in. I think council needs to have an opportunity to really talk thoroughly about what we want to see go in these corridors. And I imagine, I would hope anyway, that we're going to try to stress mixed use development in all of our corridors. So as much as I appreciate the effort that's gone into this, for me, it's just not, it's not something I want to see come forward for formal application.
Good, thank you. Councilmember Grove, then Faye.
I have a question. Based on all the citizen comments about noise and lighting and the view, why didn't you put the building further south, closer to the kind of commercial area, instead of so far back on the lot?
I think there's a few different reasons for that. First of all, we're trying to push all the parking, all the, the actual visual obstructions furthest away from the residential areas. In addition, if there are any kind of delivery trucks or transporters, we want an access for them to come into the site furthest away from those residential areas as well. So it's really to provide a more quiet and more scale appropriate context closer to their property line versus the vehicle storage areas.
But isn't the noise and all the comings and goings in the front of the building, or no, you're saying I'm not catching it, because I think it would be in the building. If you had the building closer to the busier street, then it would be less impact.
Go ahead.
So
I guess I'm not.
most of the traffic and deliveries and activity in and out of the site would be on the south end of the property. All of the physical work will happen inside the envelope of the building. And the way this building is constructed and the secondary landscape buffers, there won't be any noise at all that escapes this building.
Still not clear, but okay.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Council Member Fay.
My primary concern is always community character, and I learned that from the citizens through our very expensive and time-consuming Envision process. Citizens said they're very, very concerned about preserving existing community character. So we have a community character there on that piece of property that is really reflective of two things. One is the neighborhood, the residential neighborhood to the north. And I'm really, really sensitive and in sync with the neighbors' concerns, because I have the same thing in my community of Oak Brook that we just recently got through with a similar type of development. There's also the concern of what happens to Mineral Avenue and that whole, it's characterized by an office park right now. And it's quiet, it's sedate, not much happens there. It's a calm, even though it's a very busy corridor during the rush hours, it's calm the rest of the time. If we have auto transport trucks, as we've been led to expect, transport or semis coming in loaded up with vehicles that need to be reconditioned, that's going to completely change the character of Mineral. So it's on the south side. So as the previous speaker just talked about, that's where the noise and commotion and upset is going to be. That's going to change the character of the office park that we have going on there with medical buildings and office buildings. It is really quiet. During rush hour, we don't have any guarantees that those auto transports won't come at rush hour, and often Mineral is backed up all the way from Santa Fe, way beyond Broadway, and way up to Dry Creek Road. And the last thing we need is auto transport trucks that take up the space of, I don't know, how many vehicles, clogging that street even worse. So community character is really at issue here from two different sides, both the north, well, actually four. The north for the residential character, and the east, west, and south in Mineral, a major corridor in Littleton on the other sides. 600 vehicles is a lot of vehicles to have in storage. We, a little more than 2 years ago, had a council ordinance to allow a vehicle storage lot, a much, much smaller one, on Phillips Avenue of County Line Road. And we allowed that. And one of the requirements we had, much like this one is offering, is plants, a buffer zone. And what we found was, this is a different company. I realize McDonald is not the same company, but it certainly is the same industry, the auto storage industry, temporary auto storage industry. Paid no attention, little attention to the requirements that we gave them. So, for example, the City Council required that there be a buffer zone between the parking and Phillips Avenue, and it needed to have a certain number of bushes and trees. Those were planted, and they were completely ignored. They died in less than a year. And so they were replaced, but it took the neighborhood, which I live in, and me to receive those complaints. And then I needed to take it to the city in order to have that property owner required to replace the greenery. I find that really bothersome. So again, this company may not do that, but it is just because greenery or a buffer is promised doesn't mean that it will be kept up. And on a very practical note, I want to point out that these plants are going to be up against a north wall. That means they aren't going to get sunlight. That might mean that they won't thrive. We won't have to worry probably about them getting too tall because chances are they won't even live there. Anyway, the point is they will have to be maintained. And with that, the car storage lot on Phillips Avenue, they were not maintained. Also, the very many promises that were made by that owner, such as lighting, such as noise, such as night deliveries, such as, were not honored. And the citizens who lived in those houses, who live in the houses, again, to the north, had to work really hard to get enforced what that company agreed to. So for these reasons, I'm primarily because of the community character. Once we put 600 cars in a parking lot along Mineral, the character of Mineral Avenue, West Mineral, has completely changed from office park to auto. And we've learned from Kendig and Keast that as soon as you introduce auto intensive, the quality of the neighborhood, the community character, gets bumped down at least one notch. And we probably don't want to do that to Mineral. All done.
Great. Thank you very much. Council Member Elrod.
Looks like Mr. McDonald wanted to comment. If he can go ahead, I can wait.
That'd be great. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Karina.
At the end of the day, we are in an industry that doesn't have a great reputation, but what has allowed us to be successful in Littleton is we thrive to be different than our competitors. And if you go back and look at the records of Littleton's communication to our company, we've never had to be asked to replace a tree. If you would like to walk our properties, our 15, 18 acres on South Broadway, we have more landscaping, more trees than all of our competitors. We hire Design by Sundown, which is a high-end residential company that maintains our properties. And the reason why I spend the money to have Design by Sundown maintain the property is because we want it to be a soft environment. We want it to be a welcoming environment to our consumers. And having dead trees or crooked trees is not what our culture is. And so I'm not offended by the comment, but I would really like you to drive by our properties on South Broadway and make a decision based on what we've accomplished together for the last 45 years, whatever the time period is. So we understand that we can't go in there and put a skinny tree and just let it die and not be a good neighbor, right? And we believe in our passion is doing right comes naturally. So if I had a commercial property next to me, what is doing right? Doing right is making sure the trees are healthy, that they are trimmed, that they're, obviously the grasses are replaced if they die and all that stuff. So when you look at character, I believe our company has improved the character of Littleton. And I would hopefully that you all respect that we would do the same thing at this location.
I think there is another point to bring to everybody's attention that the McDonald family are residents of Littleton. This is their home. They are very accessible people. So I understand the challenges, Carol, you may have had with the other ownership group. Michael has an office on Broadway and is there on a regular basis. As far as the semi-transports, I know there is a concern and we've heard some discussion about that. At the maximum, there would be 2 semis that would go onto this site per day. That is the maximum. This facility is closed at 5 o'clock. So at 5 o'clock, the gates are locked. No semis are allowed. So we are keeping the semis in and out of the site during non-peak traffic hours. The majority of vehicles that end up on this facility are received as trade-ins on Broadway, and they will be driven by a McDonald employee over to the reconditioning center. So very few of the vehicles that end up on that lot end up there via transport.
Thank you. And council, we have about 10 more minutes. So we have council member Elrod and then Driscoll.
And thank you for the clarification on the semi. That was going to be one of my follow-up questions to Carol's comment. So thank you, Carol, for bringing that up as well. As far as design, if you decide to continue to bring this forward to us, one of the some of the things I'd be looking at is, in fact, the unobstructed open space, the buffer area, to really ensure that it's, at least from the residential perspective, to help maintain that character of an amenity potentially for that neighborhood, as opposed to an obstruction or something not desirable. So that's something that I would absolutely look at, is open space, the use of green space, and the length of that buffer. The other thing that I was very pleased to see, and perhaps ask you to consider further, especially in the area behind the building and to the residential, more of that permeable surface type of parking lot. So it's not just a blacktop. That is, one, just good for the environment, and two, a little more aesthetically pleasing, especially again in that where it's facing the community. And the other, when we look at that trail that you were putting in there, I really want, I didn't see it today, but again, if you come forward, I'd like to see that connecting to something. So just interested in understanding access. Is it an extension of our trail system? Maybe not formally, but informally, and creating just another way to navigate through our neighborhood, our business, etc. A parking lot, but is a natural kind of path to some destination. So I'd look for some of that, but I think overall, my focus is going to be on economic opportunity and some of these aesthetics compatibility to the surrounding area. Light is also a concern for me, so I echo Jerry's comments.
In regards to the parking, the pathway, and we had envisioned maybe a pathway connecting to some other area for you all as a city, but the neighbors behind us didn't really want to have that access. They were concerned about having, people don't live in that part of the neighborhood showing up there, teenagers, all that stuff. So they asked for us not to have it connected. So it's something that we can work together on, but it was kind of pleasing them first, since they will be the ones that live directly with us. But they didn't want to have any additional crime or anything else, but they wanted to have an extension of their backyard. But we can talk through the path connecting, of course.
Councilmember Driscoll, then Milliman.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments on this, and this reminds me of a similar conversation we had on a piece of property over on Bellevue and South Broadway. Very similar type of property, where we have a piece of property here that's been vacant forever. We have, I think, a very viable opportunity to bring in a neighbor and an awesome business that's been in Littleton for 55 years. And I think we would be remiss not to really continue down this road with McDonald Automotive. I appreciate Mr. McDonald's comments about Sundown. We all, of course, know Sundown because they too are right in our backyard. What I found interesting is, in our packet, we had 18 citizen comments, of which only 5 were not in favor of this at all. Where they just were a hard no. The rest of the comments were really just based on, concerns and questions. So I think, based on just that alone, to me, the neighborhood isn't really saying no to this project. They just want to make sure it's done right. So there is no pass through, into their neighborhood. And so my thought would be the timing, 7 months down the road here, as Scott mentioned, is not a concern of mine whatsoever. They meet all the planning and zoning specs. I think we'd be wise to continue down this path.
Thank you. Council Member Milliman. And then after that, we're pretty close to the end of our time, Council.
I echo Patrick's comments. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments and questions tonight. I've learned a lot. And Mike, thank you so much for bringing this forward. And I would agree with you. I think that your dealerships on Broadway are clean, they're updated, they're well cared for. And I know you're going to do the same thing with this project as well going forward. The one thing, and agree with everything that Karina said as far as with the landscape and the permeable areas and the parking lot. I think that's super important, and I love that you're doing that or proposing that. I know there was some concerns about the potential for the employees to drive through the neighborhood, cutting through the neighborhood to get to work. So that's just, I know you can't control people's driving behaviors, but if that's something that you could talk to, if this was to go through and it was built, echo to your employees.
We've talked about employees that they can only use Broadway and Mineral, right? We don't want to go through the neighborhoods. And, it's one of those things, if the only way we would know is if the neighbor would let us know that our employees are there. Of course, we would, but it would be a policy for all the employees that go back and forth.
Great, thank you. Now, just one last thing. I know that this your proposal absolutely meets our comp plan for suburban commercial. It's a key community entry along a high-profile roadway corridor, and you're introducing more attractive development, higher standards for landscaping, signs, building design. So I appreciate the proposal coming forward, and I agree with Patrick. I think that we would be remiss not to consider this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Fay, and then I'll do the wrap-up comments. You are muted.
Okay. Since we have precedent here for council members, for the most part, taking a second turn, I will take a second turn that I hadn't intended to, but there's always something more to be said. So I will say again on community character, since we spent so much money and so much time, not this last summer, but the one before, collecting citizens' opinions and attitudes toward what the city needs to be. And really, really high on that came, we want more attention paid to community character. What we're setting out to do here is change the community character of West Mineral, from quiet office park to very intensive auto oriented by having 600 cars parked along Mineral. So as we consider things, do we really want, council, for West Mineral character to change to something like Broadway north of Littleton Boulevard? Picture that. Cars, 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 cars. This establishment could be the beginning of a complete change of West Mineral. Do we really want that as the community character? That's all.
Thank you very much. So I just have a few wrap-up comments that I heard out there from council that I'll just share with you. And you probably already have these notes, but I'll share anyway. One was the roof slope, fenestration, and light pollution concerns or improvements that hopefully that'll be in mind. That it may not be matching the new comp plan ideally as we would hope. Let's see, the community character concern, does it change the character of the community? Foliage plan, that we want to make sure the foliage is kept up. Let's see, traffic on the property as well as employee traffic was a concern. Open space, the buffer, make sure that's kept up. That goes back to the foliage. I heard that a possibility of a trail connecting with the neighborhood, and I think that was addressed, but that did come up as a council concern. Council, is there any other thing that I missed in there? All right. Well, thank you very much for coming forward for the P4. I hope it was valuable for you on how to proceed. And Michael Sutherland, thank you very much for getting the folks together to come together with their plan for us.
Thank you, Mayor.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Anything else, Michael McDonald?
No, I just want to thank you. I know that our industry has some challenges, and it's the cars. comment was the fact that if it's an office building, it's going to have cars. And, you know, at the end of the day, we hope that you'll understand that our desire is to continue to sell cars in a manner that is reflective of the great city we live in. We are neighbors. We care about our community. We're involved in our community. And this will just help us continue to grow and generate more revenue for you all, and also continue to have employees that have the opportunity to grow within our company. So I appreciate the time and effort tonight.
Thank you, Michael. I am disappointed you don't have the flying cars yet.
There's still talk about that, but it's about 15 years away.
Okay, thank you very much. City Manager, anything else for you?
No, Mayor, that's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Then we'll move on to our next item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Cool.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, Council, we will move on to our item number 1B. That is the ID number 20-302, consolidation of the Littleton Arts and Cultural Commission, Museum and Library Board. And with that, I will turn that over to the City Manager.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to go ahead and hand that off directly to Kelly Nardi. She's got a presentation here with some staff. So Kelly.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Council. Hello, citizens. I'm Kelly Nardi. I'm Director of the newly created Department of Cultural and Media Services, which I think I can speak on behalf of the staff of the three departments, Communications, Library, and Museum, that we are very excited about the opportunities that consolidating these three departments are going to present into the future. So also helping me present tonight is Tim Nims, our Museum Director, and Nancy Trim, our recently promoted Library Director. And I don't know if Council knows Nancy very well, but if you haven't had a chance to get to know her, we want to change that. She's terrific, and she's going to bring some great ideas to the library. So tonight we have a proposal for your consideration to consolidate the four boards that this department is responsible for. That is the Museum Board, the Library Board, the newly created Littleton Arts and Culture Commission, and the Fine Arts Board. As Council is well aware, COVID has hit the city hard, and I think it's fair to say that the museum and library have probably borne the brunt of that. Staffing at the museum is down 29%. Staffing at the library is down 30%. And COVID has not caused any decrease in the responsibilities of these two departments. And maybe I'll have Nancy and Tim speak to that a little bit more in a minute. Bemis Library has created dozens and dozens of virtual and digital programs. Many parents and the school district relied on Bemis Library as a resource for students as schools were closed to assist in educational programs. By the same token, the museum has also created dozens of virtual and digital programs and tours to also help meet the educational needs of the community. With the addition of the Littleton Arts and Cultural Commission, staff has determined that it can no longer support all of the requirements of four different boards. The four boards in total comprise about 30 citizen members. What we have found is that the newly created Littleton Arts and Culture Commission's bylaws, its charter, and its soon to be adopted strategic plan provide a great deal of alignment with the tasks associated with the Museum Board and the Library Board. Just for a little background information, I asked Colleen to do some research on when the Museum Board and the Library Board were created. And she went all the way back to 1960 and found existence of the Library Board, and all the way back to 1968 found evidence of the Museum Board. We're not really quite sure when those boards were created, but it is fair to say they're in the ballpark of being about 60 years old. As you are well aware, the city manager has done a great deal of organization within the city structure. And so Tim and Nancy and I thought this was a good time to also take a look at reorganizing the structure of these boards. We have a plan for consolidation, and that is in your council packet. And without going into a great deal of detail, what we are proposing is increasing the size of the Arts and Culture Commission from 9 members to 11. Those 2 new positions, one would be an automatic appointment of the museum board chair and the library board chair. To accommodate the staggered terms going forward, there would be a total of 5 appointments in 2021. 2 would be those board chairpersons. There would be 4 positions up for reappointment in 22, 4 in 2023, and 3 in 2024, which provides a great deal of balance. We would ask that those board chairs of the library board and the museum board establish a standing committee, and they would call that committee together at the request of either the museum director or the library director. An example I can give you is that the Littleton Museum has accreditation through the American Association of Museums. Reaccreditation is required every 10 years. The next reaccreditation would occur in 2025. So at some point in 2024, Tim would ask that board to put together a standing committee to review the documents required for reaccreditation. Both of these boards are self-mandated. In priority-based budgeting, the library board falls in the third quartile, and the museum board falls in the second quartile. So it is entirely a council decision as to whether you want to continue these boards. These boards have provided a tremendous service to the community over the years, and their accomplishments are not to be overlooked. But if you look at the duties assigned to those 2 boards and look at the present structure of the staff, it seems like many of the tasks that were assigned to those boards are more appropriately addressed by the professional staff, utilizing best practices in the library and the museum industry. So with that, I think I'll just turn it over to you for questions. If you have specific questions about the library board, I'd ask Nancy to answer those. And specific questions about the museum board, I'd ask Tim to answer those. So I'll open up to questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly. All right. First of all, I want to recognize the staff at the museum and especially at the library for the incredible job that they're doing under these difficult times to keep the museum grounds and the programs going one way or another virtually at Bemis. So the incredible staff that we have over there. So good job to all. We'll go to Councilmember Driscoll, then Milliman.
Thanks, Kelly. Nice job. I do think it's wise to consolidate. I feel like we have a lot of overlapping going on, and we've talked about this with Tim, and maybe Nancy was involved in that conversation, but I'm glad we're doing a little consolidation. I do think it's needed. What would happen with the existing board members we probably are, you said we're going down to 11 members. So what happens to the existing members that still have terms left on their?
That's an excellent question. I'm sorry I didn't address that before. We are proposing that the consolidation take effect at the end of March in 2021. So that means that the library board and museum board would continue to meet between now and then. So they'd have 3 more meetings where they could wrap up any loose ends or outstanding business. At that time, those board members could apply for one of those 3 vacant positions in 2021 or for future vacant positions. But at that time, those boards would essentially cease to exist.
Thank you, Patrick. We'll go Councilmember Milliman, then Elrod.
Jerry, I want to echo your comments, and I've told Tim and Nancy this too as well. I'm just so impressed with what the library and the museum have done this year, given COVID, given cuts in staffing, given staffing members that can't come to work because they're ill, giving the restrictions, yada, 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 yada. So I'm just in awe of you both, and I appreciate you both more than you know, and the community appreciates you both for everything that you've done. So thank you. And my only question is with there now being potentially 11 members on this this committee, one council person, would there also be an alternate liaison, or would it just be one council liaison? Any thoughts about that? Or two council members? Or none? I don't know.
I think one council liaison is okay. In the past, for example, the Fine Arts Board had 11 members and still just had one city council liaison. And I also failed to mention that we're recommending keeping the Fine Arts Board because they're a little bit different. They're a real roll up their sleeves working committee, and they stage Own an Original and Eye of the Camera and the Best of Shows for those exhibits each year. And so we would recommend retaining the Fine Arts Board. So the consolidation would be 4 boards to 2. And I think one council person would be enough.
Great, thank you. Council Member Elrod then Grove.
Thank you, Kelly, Nancy, Tim, for taking a look at this. One of the things we did envision when, and actually executed on when we did develop the LAC board, was to have the liaisons from the Fine Arts Board, the museum, and the library. In fact, we do have both a member from the museum and the Fine Arts Board. So the intention was always to ensure that there was a strong connection between LAC and some of these other boards and disciplines because they were so interconnected. So from that perspective, it's already kind of in line with the spirit of how we looked at arts and culture in the city of Littleton. I also feel that in the people that we have on our library board and museum board are amazing. I remember interviewing them and they were just stunning in their knowledge, their enthusiasm, their commitment. So I'm a little saddened to not be able to support all of them, but I do feel there are a few opportunities that I want to point out here. One, of course, is LAC. 2, we have our next gen that we had, I would say, a fair number of average age of our museum and library board might be a little bit younger. So perhaps there's also an opportunity for them to engage in the next gen board. And, even, I don't want to say even more importantly, or just as importantly, we have an amazing nonprofit organization, the Friends of the Library and Museum, that do so much for the library and museum. And boy, these volunteers would be such a great asset to them. So I really hope that I know they're aware, and I hope that they engage with them. The one thing I do want to bring up, and I'll ask Kelly, Tim, or Nancy to speak to this a little bit, is with these individuals that will be coming onto LAC and essentially assuming the library board and museum board, the scope of the, I'm a little concerned about a perceived, or I don't know if it's intended to be a change in the scope of LAC. There should not be a change to the scope of LAC. There's a lot that we have to accomplish, and we need to be able to walk before we could run. So I am a little concerned about any extra expectations or scope beyond where its mission and charter is now. And I just want to be able to provide that assurance to our current LAC organization on any impact that may have.
And just to be clear, Karina, if I may, LAC is the Littleton Arts and Cultural Commission.
And we obviously have to come up with a better name because LAC is LAC.
I know, that's why I decided.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have Kelly now, so she can help us with that.
There you go.
Right. Thank you for those comments. I appreciate that. And no, I think there's a fair understanding. I did personally call both the chair of the museum board and the library board, and I think both of them are fully aware that they're to jump right in and help LAC achieve its mission. And they are aware that LAC is close to adopting a strategic plan, and they are both very excited and very enthusiastic to join that board.
Great. We'll go to Council Member Grove and then Mayor Pro Tem.
I support this consolidation for a couple of reasons. One, the Arts and Culture Board has a very strategic focus. It will be able to draw on the experience from the Museum Board and the Library Board and use that for some continuity. So that makes a whole lot of sense. It's more efficient for staff time in a time where we have fewer man hours due to COVID. And it also makes sense to keep the Fine Arts Board separate since it's a working board, a doing board, and needs to push that and combine that would not make a lot of sense. And we would lose some of those art exhibits and that manpower. So I support this. I think it's a great idea.
Great. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks, obviously, to Kelly and Tim and Nancy. These boards dating back to the 1960s is obviously an incredible legacy of service over 60 years. And so, I'd be sad to see these boards go. I certainly want to thank all of the people who are serving on these boards. All of our boards and commissions volunteers are doing incredible work. I support consolidation. I think it makes sense across a variety of considerations, fiscal and so on. The only question I have, Kelly, is, and I guess this sort of goes to Karina's point about where the focus of LAC is going to be allowed to be. I know the materials mentioned subcommittees on the new board, dealing more specifically with the library and museum. Can you just give us a sense of how those subcommittees might function and what kind of resources that might, I don't want to say take away, but reroute from what the commission might otherwise be doing?
I'm going to turn this over to Tim because Tim is really the expert on LAC and he's been with it from its inception. So Tim, would you please respond?
Sure, Kelly. Evening, Council. Nice to see you. Nice to see you all, at least by picture tonight. I think it's a really good question, Scott. One of the things that we have talked about in particular with these two new subcommittees, LACC already does have a subcommittee structure that is starting to form up. One of them has been working on the strategic plan. Another is going to be working on some of the housekeeping pieces, if you will, bylaws and that sort of thing that have already moved through. These would be standing subcommittees rather, as opposed to ad hoc. And the idea would be that they would not be populated necessarily from the existing commission members. The two chairs that would be coming on board, the museum board chair and the library board chair, would essentially form their own subcommittees. That's what we've been asking our subcommittee chairs to do. Those could be drawn from existing museum board members or existing library board members. We've made the membership aware of those opportunities in addition to the LACC vacancies that Kelly mentioned. So I think the goal would be for it not to detract from the forward progress that LACC is starting to make and will continue to make through this coming year as we finalize the strategic plan. I think most importantly, they would be sort of on call as opposed to being monthly meetings. So it is a reduction in the amount of staff time, but also it's a reduction of the amount of volunteer time. There are a number of months when we don't have a lot of business to conduct. Both the museum board and library board throughout the course of the year tend to be largely ambassadorial, unless there are specific things that we need. On the museum side, the museum board is charged specifically with approving any deaccessions from the collection. So if our curator of collections determines that a piece of equipment from that came in 45 years ago either is no longer in good enough condition to display, or we've found a replacement that's in better condition, the museum board is charged and is required under our accreditation responsibilities as having a role in approving those type of things. And accreditation is probably the biggest piece of that. Kelly mentioned that we're on a 10-year cycle with the American Alliance of Museums for accreditation. We have been continually accredited since 1973, so we're one of the longest accredited museums in the country. but that while the cycle is every 10 years, the self review portal opens about 30 months out. So while we'll be coming up in 2025 for the official reaccreditation, but we'll start in 2022 for the self review. So at that point, we would be calling on the museum board subcommittee to come in and look at foundational documents initially and those sort of things. I know Nancy has a number of items that the library board would be responsible for as well, but it would largely be on call at this point, and it would be drawn from either existing museum and library board members, from citizens who are interested in serving on those subcommittees, something like that, as opposed to pulling out of the commission membership.
Scott, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted a quick follow up and say I was gonna ask about what kind of staff time the subcommittees might need, and I'd hate for us to do this consolidation and for the subcommittees to be sort of as busy as the museum board itself was, or the library board itself was. It sounds like that won't be the case. So
I think it's going to be considerably less.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm all about consolidating.
Great.
Nancy, would you like to speak to that as far as the library is concerned? I know one of the rules would be if there are gifts to the library.
If there are gifts to the library, also if there are book challenges to the library, occasionally a patron may object to an item that's in our collection, and there's a formal process that they must go through to do that. They must fill out a form, and then that form will go to the library director. I would review that, prepare a response for that patron. If they were not pleased with my response or did not agree and wanted to take it further, that's when the library board gets involved, and the library board would be the final arbitrator of that request to reconsider a material and an item in the collection. So in that instance, I would have to call a subcommittee. That happens very rarely. We just got one actually 2 months ago, but I think Tim said he hadn't had one in years and years. So, and the other reason we may call a subcommittee maybe within the next 6 months is because we are embarking on a strategic plan for the library. So we may want to call some of those members for something like a focus group, for instance, or to provide feedback to our consultant.
Great. We have Councilmember Fay. Then I think I'll do the wrap up on this. Go ahead, Councilmember Fay.
Yeah, question for you, Mr. Mayor. Given that special language and special code words usually are indicative of in crowd and out crowd, those who are included and those who are excluded, how did we get this far in this process with at least one, that would be me, council member, having no idea what a LAC is? And part two is, again, what does LAC mean?
Great. Well, LAC, that stands for the Littleton Arts and Cultural Commission. And if you recall, when that was put together, I think about 2 years ago, maybe a year ago.
I have never heard this term before. Never. I don't remember. No.
All it is the acronym. It was before this council is when it came together.
Well, I was on the previous council.
Right. And that's when we put it together. So that's what LAC stands for. All right.
And then,
go ahead.
Okay, I'll let the other question go. You know what it is. Let it go. Never mind.
And as far as the consolidating part, that's something that we've been talking about over this past year as a council. That can we do anything to consolidate to help save staff time? And then I think COVID is kind of moved it up to make it even more important at this time. And this may not be the end of consolidation, but with that, I just want to say that the expertise that the applicants bring for all four of these boards, for those folks that have been appointed and even for the ones that aren't appointed, it's just amazing that the skill that Littleton citizens bring to our different boards. I do support this consolidation, Mark. So thank you for bringing this forward for all of us. Council, Councilmember Elrod, and then we'll go to City Manager to close it out.
We will be meeting with the Littleton Arts and Culture Commission Board on Thursday. I don't know if there's been any outreach to them yet, Kelly, Tim, or Nancy, but we'll share it with them, of course, if there's any significant, positions on it one way or another. We'll share that with council as well. But I'm happy to bring this with them along with Kelly and Tim. So thank you.
Great.
I did talk to that board chair as well, and he is in support of the concept.
Great. Thank you very much. City Manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. So I think I've got pretty clear direction. I'll work with staff and the City Attorney's Office. We will be drafting some ordinances and a resolution. So you'll be seeing that on your tentative calendar here in the near term. I also just want to comment, you did see this in the staff communication. There were two other boards that we did consider, the Board of Adjustments and Building Board of Appeals. Staff does not recommending combining them right now. We do have an update to our building codes. And so having the board separate is probably to our advantage, at least here for one more year. Maybe that's something that we look at here later on. But again, we did not recommend combining those two.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kelly, Tim, and Nancy. We expect to hear more out of Nancy here in the future. Thank you. And again, the staffs, and I go to the library and the museum frequently, and they are amazing. And under these tough times, they are really serving the citizens. So please pass that message on from all of us. All right.
We will. Thank
We
you
have
so
a
much.
nice video of someone reading the Polar Express.
We do.
If you haven't seen that yet, I suggest
True
you check it
professional.
out if you have little ones at home.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right.
Bye-bye.
So council, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to our next item. And that is item 1C, ID number 20-303. That's the CARES Act final update. And that's the final update for our current go around, at least. There could be something from the state as well as the feds yet to come. So I'll turn it over to the city manager.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. So as the mayor said, this is kind of our final presentation on the CARES Act. And I'm going to turn this over to, excuse me, Tiffany Hooton, our finance director, as well as Ashley Bolton, our administrative services director. I will say that we are, I think I've shared this with you both privately and certainly maybe as part of the communication. It has been one heck of a challenge trying to work through this federal process here to spend the money by the end of the year. And it has been somewhat of a fire drill here, I've got to be honest, but staff has worked really hard trying to get a conclusion to this and to meet all of the appropriations that council has set over the last several months. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tiffany and to Ashley.
Good evening, Council. We do have a short presentation that we want to share with you this evening. And I think, there we go. I think Mark hit the nail on the head. We were ecstatic that we were able to get $4.4 million of CARES Act funds. But with that came some strings and some attachments that we had to apply to. And I think one of the biggest challenges was these funds had to be expended by December 30th. There were a number of unknowns throughout this process. The U.S. Treasury wasn't able to provide some really good guidance in the beginning. They did kind of come through over the past few months and provide some additional guidance, but it still left a lot of questions and uncertainties. So our staff worked really closely with Arapahoe County and Jefferson County to understand their process, to understand our requirements as a subrecipient, and to understand what projects were allowable under the CARES Act. And so we just kind of want to give you an update of where we started, where we are today, and what we have left of the CARES Act funds. So we're going to just talk about the history of CARES Act. You'll see on a timeline in a few minutes that we have had a number of discussions related to CARES Act. I believe we are on our 10th meeting with council over the last 9 months or so, talking about CARES Act. So it is a well-known item that the city's been dealing with. A lot of projects are in process. Many are completed, but we'll just talk a little bit about the history. And then I kind of mentioned the timeline, and I'm just going to refresh everyone on the approved uses of funds, some of the phases that we went through with council. We want to talk a little bit about some of our final things that we want to do as far as reallocating a few of the resources that have been approved. And then we want to give you a quick status of the projects, what's completed, what's still yet to be completed, and then a few final steps. So as I mentioned, we received $4.4 million. This was given through the original CARES Act funds from the U.S. Treasury. We started discussing and talking about projects that we're going to use for this on May 26th. 3 of the requirements were it needs to be necessary related to the COVID-19 emergency. They could not have been in your budget prior to March 27th. And then they had to have been incurred between March 1st and December 30th. And that December 30th deadline has been the biggest challenge, I feel like, on most of our projects. A little bit of history. We've talked about CARES Act almost every month for the past 6 to 7 months, almost 9 months. We had to approve some IGAs. We wanted to talk about our phasing, how we were going to decide what projects we were going to select. We came back and talked to council several times on certain phases just to clarify some funding sources and what we wanted to use those on. We had to approve the budget to spend the monies. And then here we are today on December 8th, which is 20 days before our deadline, 12 days? 22 days. Thank God Ashley's here. 22 days left for us to complete these projects because they still have to be completed by December 30th. We did just kind of want to touch on some of the phasing that we did over the last few months. We understood there were a lot of needs in the city, when we kind of came together internally with our internal CARES Act group and just talked about what are our needs, what are pressing, what is priority, how are we going to spend these funds, are we going to make our December 30th deadline, and we made a list of over $9 or $10 million of potential uses of these funds. So we had to dial that down. We had $4.4 million. We understood there were a lot of needs in the community with businesses, nonprofit organizations. We had a lot of technology needs, trying to afford our employees to work from home and remotely, having to act on a dime in order to get computers and teleworking options and phone system updates so that we could answer phones from wherever we were and not necessarily just in our office. So there were a lot of needs and a lot of discussions on what we're going to use those funds for. So I hadn't planned on going through each project, but I did just want to kind of touch on a few of them. First and foremost, PPE for our staff and for our employees. It was really tough to get masks in the beginning. We worked with our department, we worked with our local EOC so that we could make sure that we had protective gear for our employees throughout this. Updating our phone system so we can work remotely, answer calls wherever we were, not necessarily in the office. Business grants, businesses were forced to shut. So we really wanted to afford some of these CARES Act funds to those businesses to help them through this as well. One of the largest projects that we are working on that Tyler has been sharing with you is our council chamber remodel. We can't social distance in there the way that the footprint is. And so we really had to take a look at that and understand what we needed, how we could get there, and hopefully ensure that we're going to get it done by December 30th. A lot of the projects I mentioned are technology related, making sure that we have security cameras at our library and museum in case we needed to do any contact tracing, things like that. Updating our Zoom rooms like we have right now, making sure that we can still conduct meetings and you're able to do those council meetings. So there are a lot of technological programs and projects that we are working on. The chart that you are looking at, the colors might look a little odd, but there is some reasoning behind that. When we looked at CARES Act, we looked at it 2 different ways. We looked at our phasing that we brought to council, and then we also looked at it under the categories that are allowed under Arapahoe County and Jefferson County's model for expenditures. And so this is the phasing part of the CARES Act. I think what's important is you can see at the end of the day, we have used all of our funds. Our full $4.4 million have been allocated to projects. We are currently working on them. We envision all of these projects to be completed in the near future. And we will have expended all of our funds in accordance with the provisions of the CARES Act. So I mentioned kind of some reallocation of resources. Due to the timeline and the constraints of getting all of these projects completed, just our sheer manpower within our employees and our teams, trying to get these accomplished by December 30th has certainly been a challenge. And, along the way, there's been projects that might have come in a little over what we anticipated or a little bit under what we anticipated. And so we as a staff kind of looked at all of those projects internally, and we sorted them and kind of are projecting them to you based on the categories that I mentioned. And so there were some defined categories in the CARES Act fund. There were medical expenses, which we don't have at the city. We don't provide emergency services, and we don't provide a hospital capability. So we didn't have any medical expenses. But we did have public health expenses. We had expenses related to facilitating compliance. We had some employee or payroll expenses, the economic support to our businesses and our nonprofits. And then we had some things that fall under others, such as weekends on May, trying to help our businesses continue through some of these limitations. And when we evaluated all of these projects, most recently on Tuesday, I believe it was, we really wanted to understand where we were on our expenditures, what other projects might need a little additional funding, where we might have some excess in others. And so the chart that you have before you kind of shows each category, and it shows whether we needed some additional funding for that category or if we had some excess. And, I think out of a $4.4 million budget of CARES Act, we're really just allocating about $111,000 in total, which is not very much if you consider the projects that are involved, the complexity of the projects, not really understanding or knowing at the immediate allocation what that cost might be. And I think the one important one that I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to that kind of is the majority of the $111,000 is unemployment costs. So one of the allowable expenses of CARES Act is unemployment costs. We have employees who were furloughed. We have employees who might have been laid off. And then also unemployment follows back 1 year as previous employers. And so we really didn't know how unemployment costs were going to affect Littleton based on COVID and the shutdown of the economy. And when we did the estimates on unemployment costs, we estimated it was going to be about $208,000. And before we knew that the state was actually going to be funding 50% of that. So we estimated about $208,000, and the state is going to pay for about half of that. So that's the majority of the category or the project that has some excess funds. And so we took those excess funds and we kind of allocated them to some of the other projects where we might have needed a little additional funding. The one thing that I did also want to kind of talk about is there's some recent guidance that came out from the U.S. Treasury as to the allowance of public safety salary costs related to COVID. So there was originally a limitation that you had to prove that in our case, your police personnel were substantially dedicated to COVID efforts. And there was a lot of ambiguity around that and not very clear guidance. And the Treasury came out just recently that allowed you to presume, and they're calling it a presumption, that you can presume that certain staff of your police department were substantially dedicated to COVID efforts, and therefore the $101,600 that was remaining from the last discussions that we had, we will be submitting to the county under that presumption. So we will be essentially reimbursing the general fund the $101,600 under that presumption. I think also, depending on where we are on December 30th with some of our other projects, there is a possibility that we may have to add to that presumption, just depending on, if we do get all of the other projects done by December 30th. But we will have to assess that likely around December 29th to really understand if we're going to have to add to that. I know it's crazy that we have to adhere to these timelines and these deadlines, but that's the U.S. Treasury, and we have to go by their guidance. So I think if you have any specific questions on projects, this next list that we have is a status, and you'll see that there are quite a few projects that have been completed by December 3rd when we prepared this. We offered an office remote setup for our employees. There were a lot of employees who might have needed chairs. They might have needed a monitor. It's really difficult to work on just a laptop, and so having these extra peripherals related to computer setups was a need for them. And so we offered a program that ended on November 30th, and so that was part of it. And of course, the business grants and the nonprofit funding, Weekends on Main, we had very successful weekends related to businesses downtown for Weekends on Main, and just a number of other projects that have already been completed. Now, on the other side are projects that are still pending by December 30th, but I know that Ashley and her team are working furiously, probably day and night, to ensure that all of those projects are completed by December 30th. And I'm sure Ashley can attest to that and how hard she and her staff and the city in general has been working to get that completed. So I think, the next steps that we have, so as of December 3rd, we have been reimbursed 1.7 million roughly of the 4.4. We do have some remaining reimbursement dates. The 10th this week is a deadline for Arapahoe County, so we will be submitting quite a bit to them. December 20th is a Jefferson County deadline, and then December 23rd is when, I think I said December 29th earlier, but December 23rd is the date that we need to provide a final accounting for the presumption for police personnel that we will be doing. And then again, completion of the projects by December 30th. And then we do have a little bit of catch-up reimbursements that the counties are allowing in January. And that's mainly for projects, that we might not get billed until the first week of January, just because of timing of our projects being completed. And so I think with that, if you have any specific questions, Ashley might want to talk a little bit about some of the projects. This is a Zoom room. This is a project that we have been working on, and she can kind of
so we just wanted to show you guys, we were able to complete 20 Zoom rooms across our 5 city buildings. Tiffany and I are sitting right now in our PD training rooms, which we also use as our emergency operations center. So God forbid, if we ever did have a crisis, we would have this available to us as well to be able to collaborate with folks remotely. But in addition to this room, we've done, 10 rooms total at the city center. We have done 4 at the library, 3 at the museum, including the museum lecture hall, which I think will be a great addition for boards and commissions meetings. We've done 2 at the courthouse. One of those rooms will be able to do our defensive driving classes remotely. for those who want to partake virtually, as well as the Bellevue Training Center, which also is another great room like PD training, as well as a museum lecture hall where we can do large conference meetings as well as training meetings. So just wanted to alert you guys that these are resources now even available to you. So until Councilor Chambers is done, we can get you trained up on how to actually use these if you did want to come in and look to do a hybrid council meeting in the future. And I did just want to take another minute just to thank our teams. I was talking with our procurement officer, Dave Ems, recently, and the amount of work that these teams have done. I mean, we have really done probably 3 years worth of work in 6 months. And I just can't thank our teams enough for their perseverance, their diligence, and just never ending commitment to do great things for our city. So thank you, teams, wherever you are.
All right, if you could clear your screen out there for us, please. All right, thank you. Before I get into the council questions, I want to verify with the city manager. There is no direction you're looking from council tonight. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think this is just an update to show you how we're going to balance the books here and get every dollar that has been allocated to the city. I did want to share, though, with council, even though we may have had a handful of projects that might have been a little bit more, the council chambers is not one of them. So it is on budget. And so that allocation is not necessary for that project.
Great. And what is the status as far as the grand opening or unveiling?
Well, the end of the year, I think Tyler before the meeting gave us a quick little view of that, but we've painted the walls. The grid ceiling is going in place. A lot of the conduit, HVAC, electrical, all that stuff's in play. It truly is now just getting down to probably the very end, certainly the flooring, getting the chairs, the big acoustical divider wall, that's going to be recessed into the wall so we can divide the room in half. So the goal is to get this thing done here by the end of the year. And if council wishes, then we certainly could start having meetings in place. The new dais is large enough where we believe social distancing will be possible and appropriate for council. We'll probably take that on here in the next couple of weeks here and share that with council more detail. But again, the goal is right after the first of the year.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions? I see none. Okay. Well, Mark, unless you have anything else, I think we're going to move on.
That's it, Mayor. Again, I deeply appreciate the council's commitment behind all this. This has been a interesting journey here for all of us.
Indeed, it has. All right. So we'll go into our city manager updates.
Mayor, I see Councilmember Grove has her hand up.
Oh, thank you very much.
Question, Mark, is the city council chambers a Zoom room? Could you have a hybrid meeting in there?
We certainly could. In fact, it's been designed so with that partition wall, we could have 2 separate rooms with 2 separate Zoom capabilities. So yes, and again, thanks to Ashley and her team, they put a lot of thought into this and how we can maximize the opportunities.
And you also said the museum too, so that there can be live meetings as well as broadcast.
Yeah, we would love to be able to give council a tour of everything we've done because it is really impressive. And excellent. I just can't thank Ashley and the rest of the teams behind this. This was just an amazing event here. As she said, literally 3 years worth of work in 6 months. That's truly the scale of what we just pulled off.
Excellent. All right. Any other report from you?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I do have a part of the city manager comments if you're ready for that.
Yes.
So I do have a couple of things that I want to talk about and bring your attention to. The tentative calendar, first of all. I've made some pretty active changes and I've been trying to keep council informed with that through some emails, but I just want to kind of publicly acknowledge a few things. And again, our tentative calendar is accessible to the public here by going to the city's webpage and hitting meetings tab, and then it'll take you to another page for which you can see the tentative calendar pretty easily. So I have added next week on December 15th, we are going to be coming before council and talking about a contract approach here for our omnibus shopping cart. And as you will remember, the council put a budget proviso on the entire budget for that operation for 2021. And so we believe we've worked out the details, and we'll be making a presentation on that. I've also, I commented on this, and certainly we will be working with Reed and other staff, but as the direction here for board consolidation, you'll be seeing some first and second reading ordinances. We'll start the first readings here on next week. And then our next meeting, because of the holidays, isn't until January 5th. And then you'll see a second reading plus a resolution, is my understanding. Reed can kind of confirm that. Staff has done a fair amount of work here through the police department in preparation for a possible regulation around gun storage at retail establishments. And so myself and the city attorney, we've been reviewing that material. We'll be meeting our police chief here in the near term, but we're looking at the first reading of a possible ordinance on January 19th. And then staff has reviewed with the mayor and pro tem here on Monday a draft schedule for the historic district. And if you remember, there was a comment that was made here a couple of weeks ago about the opportunity for this existing seated council to not only look at the adoption of the ULUC, but then also have the opportunity to review and approve a possible historic district for our downtown. And so staff has made that modification. We are going to be sharing that with all of council. And so our intent is to march in that direction. I'll tell you up front, it'll be difficult just because of the magnitude of what we're trying to do. And I'll add some commentary here for that when we share that with all of council, but we're now marching in that direction. Shifting over to the COVID front, I have a couple of updates to provide council. I was in a meeting here this afternoon with other city managers, county staff, and kind of reviewing what you've probably seen on the news here, this 5-star certification process for businesses. And this is being modeled after a positive experience in Mesa County earlier in the year as they were trying to manage businesses and the COVID issue. There are a lot of unknowns. I'm just going to tell you that up front here, but it does look like the governor has serious interest in this. There's likely to be an announcement next Monday. We could see this being implemented as soon as the 18th. Some of the issues that are still to be decided include not just restaurants, but there is a broad application here for businesses across the state. And if you take this broad interpretation and you look at it just for the city of Littleton, it's over 1,800 businesses. And so that alone is pretty significant. So we're hoping that the state provides some priority. And to be honest, I think the real emphasis that we recommended back to the county, and I know they did to the state, is to put the restaurants on top. Let's try to find a certification process for them so they can hopefully put, in essence, better practices, best management practices, and certainly some other measures to keep the public safe. And by doing that, by going beyond the minimum, the intent here, of course, is to allow more occupation of indoor space for restaurants and other businesses. There is still some discussion going around whether or not this certification process will apply to any county that's within the red level. And so that still has not been decided. And so we are clearly, as Arapahoe County, well within the red level. And so I'm very curious to see how the state, our governor, reacts to that. Finally, there was some discussion at this meeting. The governor did sign a bill that did allow cities to kind of manage a possible cap on third-party deliveries for food and beverage. And that was a pretty interesting discussion with the city managers. Denver has already done this with mixed results. In fact, there was an article in the Denver Post, an editorial on that very subject. I think it's very problematic, in my opinion. I think there's lots of issues. Centennial is looking at that. They had the first reading of an ordinance apparently here just recently. So I think we're going to huddle up as staff, city attorney's office. We're going to be reviewing that particular issue. And at some point, I'll be coming back to you with a recommendation on what I believe the city of Littleton may want to approach that issue. Finally, there is a notice that went out here yesterday and again today. The governor and the state is offering for the elected officials an update on the scheduling of vaccines. And so if you have not received that and you are wanting to look at that opportunity, I believe it's Wednesday at 11:30. It's a Zoom meeting. Just let me know and I'll send you the opportunity, the link for that. And so with that, Mayor, that's the end of my update here for this evening.
Great. Thank you very much. City Attorney.
Yeah, the city manager took up a lot of my time, so I'll be brief. Just speaking of some of the things that the governor has come out with, obviously the special legislative session came away with a couple of, I guess, key items. One was a grant, if you will. It's not a huge amount, but a grant that will be going to counties to be distributed to some of the businesses that have been the most impacted by having to shut down or reduce their capacity, restaurants being one of those. So I believe Arapahoe County will be the one for some of our businesses to contact to receive any grant funds that they may have available. The second item of note that passed in the legislative session was the state allowed for businesses to keep the state's portion of sales tax. And that's 2.9%. They allowed them for November, December, January, and February. And so those are kind of the two highlights, if you will, that came out of the legislative session. That's all I have.
Good. Thank you very much. And with that, we are down at the end of our agenda for this item tonight. And council, just a reminder that we do have a meeting next Tuesday, and that is our final meeting for the year. That's Tuesday, December 15th at 6:30. And that is a regular meeting. So with that, the process, what we're going to do now is we're going to adjourn from the study session. We go into a special meeting. And then once we go in from the special meeting, and assuming the motion will be made for executive session, that's where the public will not be hearing what council is discussing at that time. After executive session, we will come back to the public meeting once again, and that's when we will adjourn at that point. So, Rita, that process is correct, right?
That is correct. I do see Miss Elrod has her hand raised.
Oh, boy. Okay, go ahead. Karina?
I have a question for Mark regarding the 5-star rating and where restaurants are going. You're looking for the restaurants to be the ones we focus on first. I've been contacted by several restaurant owners in Littleton. Are they aware of this? How do we get them engaged? Maybe even provide some thoughts or feedback on some recommendations.
Actually, great question. That was one we talked about with the city managers. Apparently, the state is looking for some kind of an opportunity for direct feedback on this topic from the businesses and specifically the restaurants. So the county did not have that information immediately, but I'm hoping that tomorrow we're going to have a little bit better idea. Then we would take that information along with all the other cities, the county, and we'd be sharing that electronically. So I've been trying to encourage restaurants and businesses to make sure you sign up on our electronic email system here. I know that Kathleen Osher and Kelly Nardi, those two have been coordinating with the state. And so as soon as we get these updates and the opportunities, we're going to make sure we send out emails.
Thank you very much. And with that, it is 8:27 p.m. and the study session is adjourned. Thank you. Tyler, I'm going right. Yep. Great. Thank you. I call to order the special meeting for the Littleton City Council for December 8, 2020. To order it, the time now is 8:27. City Attorney, if you could do a roll call for us, please.
I could. I'm looking, and I think we had a couple who may have dropped off.
Well, let's see if they're still there or not.
Are we able to take a 5-minute break?
supposed to go to a Teams meeting.
We've opened the meeting, so we have to hold off for a second here.
Oh, sure.
We were given a link for a Teams meeting.
Yeah.
We have to do an attendance, please, if you could do the attendance.
Sure. Mayor Valdez,
Here.
Councilmember Grove,
Here.
Councilmember Elrod,
Here.
Councilmember Milliman,
Here.
Councilmember Millen,
Here.
Councilmember Driscoll,
Here.
Councilmember Fay. So we have 6 here. Perhaps Miss Fay dropped off.
Hopefully she'll be back in just a moment. Yeah, and we will be going to a Teams meeting in just a minute here. Hopefully Carol will come back here.
We have a quorum though, right? We can just motion to adjourn.
We do have a quorum. I don't know what happened to Carol though. So
which is probably the Teams
with
meeting.
that, if we could, Councilmember Elrod, if you could please give us a motion. Councilmember Elrod looks like she's frozen there.
I'll move to adjourn to an executive session.
Second.
If you could please read the motion.
Oh, was that not adequate? I can.
We have to be as specific as possible why we're going into the executive session.
You have in front of you?
No, sorry, I'm looking for the agenda. Somebody has it.
I'll
go ahead and I'll make the motion. I move to go.
I can do it, Jerry.
Okay, thank you.
I move to go into an executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024A and Article 3, Section 27 of the City Charter for purposes of discussing the purchase, acquisition, lease, transfer, or sale of any real or personal property.
Making the motion, Carol, to go to executive session.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second by Mayor Pro Tem was the second. City Attorney, if we could do a vote. A thumbs up will be to go into executive session. A thumbs down is to not go into executive session. So if you will, please vote.
It is 5 in favor. We are allowed to go into an executive session.
5 in favor. I just want to make note that Councilmember Fay and Elrod dropped off. So our City Council has voted 5-0 in favor of going into executive session for the purpose of discussing and the purchase, acquisition, lease, transfer, or sale of any real or personal property. No formal action will occur in the executive session. At the conclusion of the executive session, City Council will return to our special meeting. Let's see. So at this point, Council, we are going to leave the Zoom meeting and go to the Teams meeting. Okay. And once there, we will be in our executive session. So if we will, Council, if you could please go to your Teams meeting. Okay, council has returned from the executive session. No formal actions were we took no formal actions. And I think with no additional business, council, it is 9:26 and we are adjourned. Have a good night, and we'll see you for our last meeting Tuesday. Bye-bye.